Hi, everyone. My name is Steve Schwartz. I'm the founder of the LSAT blog, and today I'm very excited to be chatting with Anne Levine, founder of Law School Expert. How are you doing today, Anne?
Great. Nice to speak with you.
So, Anne, tell us a little bit more about your background and what you do. I understand that you were for a law school admission dean at a couple of schools, and since then you have your own thing.
I think you and I met up in New York like over a decade ago or something. It's been a while.
Yeah.
So I, I did work as a director of admissions for different law schools, and then I started Law School Expert, my law school admission consulting company in 2004. So I've just finished my 15th admission cycle, doing nothing but helping people get into law schools, which has been pretty great. And I'm the author of the Law School Admission Game, which has had 3 different editions out. Sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the back. So that's pretty much what I do. I've had the Law School Expert blog since like 2006, and there's a channel on YouTube as well, Law School Expert, where I have 2-minute tip videos about the entire law school application process.
Nice. That's awesome. And I'm wondering what you're hearing these days, as there are a number of changes in the law school timeline and with LSAC changing the admission cycle with more test administrations. I'm wondering what's going to happen with students maybe taking the LSAT more frequently or maybe applying later in the cycle. How are law schools viewing it?
It's great. I'm actually seeing really what I think are mostly positive changes for applicants as a result of the additional LSAT administrations. It's definitely giving people more options. And when schools are saying they take the highest of multiple scores and they don't care how many times you take the test, it's the highest that matters, I believe that. I'm seeing that in the results that we saw in the last year admission cycle, that it was the highest LSAT that mattered to the schools. I think it's great for the students to have more opportunities. I think it's great, especially for people who suffer from testing anxiety. It takes a little pressure off knowing that there's going to be another chance pretty much right around the corner. They're not going to have to wait 3-4 months. And I think all of that is good stuff. I think the only part of it that I'm not convinced is great for applicants is that it does entice applicants to wait to apply later in the cycle. And that's not an issue in the fall months or even in December, but you and I are speaking today, it's January 14th, and I'm not super optimistic about how a January 26th LSAT, when scores come out February 15th, I'm not sure that that's really in people's best interest. And I've been telling my clients that I think the timing is really problematic, and that for most people, if you're taking that LSAT or God forbid the one in March, I think it's more likely you should hold off and apply early in the next cycle rather than be the last applicant in the door for this one. And the reasons for that are twofold. People don't always understand this, but law schools are already making decisions. And true, they're doing it a little slower pace this year than before, but they're already making decisions. They're already sending out acceptances. They're already giving out scholarship dollars. Like when you're the last application in, even if you were able to pull up your LSAT, I think generally you're going to get better results with that same LSAT score applying early in a cycle than later.
Yeah, I agree. I think that applying early typically makes the most sense. It's when the most scholarship dollars are available. And maybe some law schools will want to lock you down, even though they do tend to delay as much as possible. But I'm still curious, though. I remember like a year or two ago when there was no January LSAT, it was the February LSAT. A lot of applicants were applying for the same cycle. Is it just that maybe their odds were lower?
They're still doing it now. And yes, their odds are lower. I mean, I've always said the February LSAT is too late. I mean, I think if you go back to my writings 15 years ago, I was saying that the LSAT that time of year was too late. It's too late for that admission cycle, that your application isn't complete until March. That's how it was. Now it's a little bit earlier, but it's still not a great situation. It's not like anyone at the law school is reviewing your application the exact moment the scores are released. Like things take time. So the earliest you're getting your application reviewed with that score is March. Deposit deadlines at some schools are, a few weeks after that. So I don't think I haven't seen people get into reach schools that late in the cycle. I haven't seen people get the same level of scholarships at that point in the cycle that people with similar credentials are getting earlier. And that's just the fact of it. And if you don't care about scholarships, okay. And if you don't care about getting into a reach school and it's just about, oh God, I haven't taken the LSAT yet, I really want to go to whatever my neighborhood law school is, and my score is sufficient for that, then great. Then this conversation doesn't apply to that person. but it does apply to the person who's trying to get the best results possible in terms of where they get in and the scholarship dollars they get.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. What about this question of law schools averaging multiple scores? I know that, of course, I think it was 2006, the ABA changed their policy of law schools only submit the highest now.
In 2006, people applying to law school today were not even teenagers. Okay? It's important to keep that in mind. That is so old that it's not even part of the consciousness of the current applicants. It's part of my consciousness and yours, but not theirs. So it's the highest score that matters. And any school that says that they take the average, what they mean by that is that that's what they're plugging into their index calculation. It means nothing. When someone is subjectively reviewing that application, they're still going to be paying attention to that highest score.
So my natural next question for you then, Anne, is if law schools don't average multiple LSAT scores in their ultimate consideration of the applicant, why bother inputting them into this admission index anyway?
Well, very few law schools do. So, I mean, I don't want to make it too important, but if I had to guess, it's more than a guess, I would say that some law schools are stuck in their ways, that there's some faculty member on the admission committee who's a total holdout and won't let them change it, something archaic. I do think that a trend in LSAT scores illustrates something for some candidates. For some candidates, it can show persistence. For candidates who struggle with standardized testing, sometimes there's a before and after accommodations that's part of the story. But my philosophy, Steve, is always to worry about the things that are within our control and not worry about the things that aren't. And this is such a minor point that is never really the reason someone gets into law school or doesn't get into law school. So it's one of those things that I kind of like, we could spend all day on a Reddit board talking about it, but what difference does it make? And so I try to keep my clients really focused on let's focus on what actually matters. And I just don't think that the averaging the LSAT scores is by, one or two law schools is the thing that matters. Those law schools, I've seen them, they take your highest LSAT.
Ultimately, that's where their incentive is given the rankings, right?
It's in their best interest. I mean, that's the one that the ABA reports. That's the one that counts for rankings purposes. So why would they act against their self-interest?
Yeah, true. And speaking of the rankings, one question I've been thinking a lot about is the GRE and how's that going to impact things? How is Robert Morse going to do?
We've come so far in such a short time with that. And most law school related things takes decades to change.
Yeah, it was really quick.
It was really quick, and it's kind of shocking. I think a few years ago, I did a podcast where someone was asking me this question 2 or 3 years ago. I'm like, oh, come on. Oh, this is not going to be a thing. And all of a sudden it's a thing. So here's what I've seen of it so far. I've had one client this cycle be admitted to Harvard Law School without an LSAT score. And I think he's the perfect person for that kind of arrangement. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about him, not too much, but he has a PhD. I think I should just stop there. So I've always said that the GRE will be used mostly for people who bring something unique, who already have demonstrated a capacity for very high level of academic rigor, where there's no question whatsoever about that candidate's ability to perform in law school. And this person would be that. I mean, went to an Ivy League school for his entire education, amazing grades throughout, amazing resume, amazing focus, a very clear why law story when you look at what he studied. So to me, he's kind of the perfect guy to do the non-LSAT application. And to be honest, he's my only applicant who I've had so far who's really tried to apply with just that score. I've had applicants who are applying with both scores, with both an LSAT and GRE, or GMAT, depending. And I'm not convinced yet that the scores for the GRE are carrying more weight than the LSAT. I mean, I'll stand by things I've said several times. I think that taking the LSAT demonstrates a true desire to go to law school because there's no other reason to take it. I think that it is statistically valuable to the law schools because they know what to do with that information. And now that it's given so often, there's not so much of a reason to not take it. And I think that's only going to increase. So I also see people who have taken this is kind of, they're getting distraught over the fact that they've taken a GMAT or GRE in the past before they were really serious about what they were doing, or because an employer required it for a promotion. And so they're worried because now they have to report those scores, even though they're not indicative of their current drive to go to law school. So I think this is a work in progress for the law schools on how much they're going to think this really matters and how often they're really going to ask about it. Some law schools, as you know, are requiring, if you've taken both, to report all the scores, and some are making it optional. And so I think that the law schools are kind of playing with this too, to decide how much it really matters to them.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm curious, given that it's so new, how they will handle it. It sounds to me like, this is just what I would do if I were in their shoes. If a GRE score is from a couple of years back, before someone was seriously considering law school, and then they have a more recent LSAT score or a more recent GRE score, we could be in the same boat where, again, they're only going to consider the highest, whether it be
I'm not. Yes, but my thing is also, like, if I have someone applying who nothing on their resume or background really screams to me why law school makes sense for them, and then all they're submitting with their application is a GRE or a GMAT score, I don't really think that person's committed to going to law school. No,
it's not serious.
In all honesty. So I think that's one of the incentives to take the LSAT, is it does show that you're committing yourself to this today. And I haven't seen a lot of people who say to me, oh, I'm bad at the LSAT, but I'm really good at the GRE. You don't really see that a lot. You're either really good at standardized tests or you're not. And it would be pretty even across the board unless there were a math component that we were taking into account.
Yeah, that does make sense to me. They are strongly correlated, and that's actually some of the evidence that Harvard Law submitted, that their own students did well on both. Surprise, surprise.
Shocker.
Yeah, well, that's funny. Yeah, big changes. One change LSAC just announced last week was about the writing sample.
Tell me. Maybe I don't even know yet. Tell me.
This was like on Friday or something.
Okay. Oh, you're ahead of things. Tell me what happened. I'm
visiting LSAC's website like every day, believe me.
That's hilarious. Okay, so tell me what I don't know.
So the writing sample, they are going to remove it from test day. Instead, it will be online from your own computer at home. They're going to monitor you with a video camera and a microphone and make you hold up your ID to show that it's really you. And law schools will have a digital typed version of it.
Interesting. So here's how I've always viewed that. That might actually entice law schools to rely more on the writing sample than they have in the past. Yeah. It's very interesting. So I've always kind of viewed the writing sample as something the law schools only look at for applicants who are international students or who they have some concern about English fluency, and they want to make sure that the person really wrote their personal statement. So they might turn to their writing sample and say, okay, did the same person really write these, right? But in this case, I think it's something law schools would look at more. If it's available to them digitally as part of the application and you don't have to parse through someone's handwriting, I actually think law schools might start to read these.
Yeah, that was my intuition as well.
Yeah.
But again, since it's not scored, I still wonder how much applicants really stress about it. You imagine?
Well, they haven't in the past, and nor would I have wanted them to. But, you know, in some of the Kira video interviews that schools are doing, like Northwestern, Cornell, people have been asked for written responses recently. You know, you have 5 minutes to write why Northwestern or whatever the prompt is. And I think that law schools are doing this more. Sorry for the dog interruption, if you can hear that. The noise canceling headphones, not so noise canceling. I think that this is something that that law schools are experimenting with. I think that writing is has been overlooked in the process by law schools, and it's crucial in lawyers. I mean, I spend quite a bit of time educating people about how lawyers write, and that it's not, oh my God, a dark and stormy night and blood gushed everywhere. Lawyers don't write, you know, they don't use words with 8 syllables. They don't. The lawyers write concisely, with brevity. It shouldn't be a problem to take your personal statement from 4 pages to 3 to 2 to 500 words. Okay. And that this is something some applicants really struggle with because they think fancy writing is better. And so I think with more opportunities like this, if law schools embrace this digital writing sample part, and if they start asking for this as part of the online video interviews that some schools do, I think that that will hit home with applicants more and might be something they practice and might make them better law students as well.
I was curious about what you were saying about 8-syllable words and writing like a lawyer versus what people might think. How does that, if we could shift gears a bit into the personal statement,
Sure, that I can talk about.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Okay.
If you still see a lot of students writing in that very flowery, elegant way they think they're supposed to write to be a lawyer.
Some. I still see it some. And I think that there's a difference between nuanced, insightful writing and that where creative vocabulary is appropriate, and the kind where people are taking their basic writing and inserting fancier words in it to make it sound better. And I think that you still see the second sometimes, but I think the key is that applicants should write in a way that sounds like them. And if there's someone who naturally speaks in a certain way, then they should write in a certain way. Because even those of us, I don't know if I put this myself in that, those of us, but even people who use big words naturally don't use them in every sentence, right? They're selectively utilized. And so I think that's where the magic happens, where it's done well versus clearly looks inserted. I think it's better to express yourself clearly using dime or 10-cent words than inserting dollar words. Not sure where you're going, or someone has to look up a word you're using.
Yeah, you want to use them sparingly.
Yeah, you want people. The key is you want someone to want to read your essay, and those words that don't make sense or the choppiness that comes from that, those are roadblocks in someone finishing your essay.
Yeah, I agree. What about addenda? I get a lot of questions about addenda.
All right. Like what? What's a question you get a lot about addenda?
I get a lot of questions about explaining away a low score on the LSAT or a low GPA.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the low scores. We don't, all addenda should be arguments that are crafted using facts, and they should not be emotional pleas. Okay. You build your case with the facts, and addendum is the strongest lawyering you do in your application. Okay. So if someone's trying to make a case that their standardized test scores don't reflect their abilities, they have to juxtapose that with strong academic abilities. So that's not for the person who has a 2.0 from undergrad and no other grades to point to, right? You cannot make a strong argument saying my LSAT scores fail to represent my academic potential when you don't have academic potential to balance it with. And I think that's a common mistake people make, is they just say, oops, my LSAT sucks. It's not indicative of who I am. And then a separate paragraph, oops, my GPA sucks. That's also not indicative of who I am. But they're not pointing to anything that says what is indicative of their potential. So that's one kind of mistake that people make in addendum. Another is when people are trying to make the case that a certain LSAT score or a certain trend in their LSAT scores isn't indicative of their abilities. And that can look like a lot of different things, but I think the biggest mistake people make there is oversharing. Like they've had 12 setbacks in their life in the last 2 years. My cat died, my mom got sick, then my grandma died, and then this and that. And all of those things are probably true, and all of them probably really did impact their ability to focus on the LSAT, but it shows poor judgment and oversharing to the schools. It shows that you're not really capable of handling your normal life disasters. And how will you do that in law school if all of that upset you? And number 3, not great judgment about actually taking the LSAT under those circumstances, right? I mean, if someone says to me, oh, I got into a car accident the night before and I didn't sleep and I was in the ER till 2 a.m. Well, then don't go take the LSAT, right? So I think that's the second trap people fall into with an LSAT addendum, is a list of excuses that actually show poor judgment rather than allay any concerns about what the scores actually were.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It can end up just kind of being a laundry list of sorrows that you've experienced.
I see it all the time. And I usually would tell someone in that case to pick the strongest one, right? Pick the one that's like the biggest impact and talk about that. But now that you can take the LSAT so many times in a year, and that'll only increase in the coming year, I'm actually counseling people to do LSAT addenda less frequently than I used to. Okay. I've gotten very hard on people about it this year in a way that I wasn't before the Take It Unlimited Times new standard, right? When people could only take it 3 times, sometimes we had to explain, right? Why they couldn't take it again. So we had to say something. But most LSAT addenda, the answer to someone writing to me about why all these things happened that impacted their score, the answer is always, well, then take it again. Well, then take it again if it's not the right score for you. Show us what the right score is. So I'm a little tougher on people about it now. With the people who have a history of poor standardized test taking juxtaposed with high GPAs, they should still write that.
Yeah. Okay. They have the proof. They have the proof of their
ability. They have the proof. And the way you, absolutely. And the way you up level it is by looking up the numbers of your entering class in college and what their SAT or ACT score was, and that yours was low for that, yet you graduate in the top 10% of your class. That's the way to write it.
So you're making a reasoned argument.
Of course. I mean, and that's what lawyers do, believe it or not, right? I mean, successful lawyers, good lawyers. So that's what you have to do is and in fact, that's what you do in law school too, is you pull out the relevant facts and you make an argument with it. And that's really what an addendum is to be able to recognize which facts are relevant and which support your conclusion and which don't.
Yeah. So that's like a clear case where it's perfectly reasonable. You can show that you outperform your numbers on a standardized test in the past. But what about something like, on test day, the proctors were really distracting, or with the digital
LSAT again.
Yeah. How about this? The digital LSAT starting this year, July, and then September, full force. Everyone's going to be like, oh, I did poorly because it was my first time on the digital LSAT.
Take it again.
Yeah.
Just take it again.
Yeah. No need to explain
away. Forget the addendum. Just take it again. I mean, there's no reason to over-explain. You know, law schools are pretty tired of all these extra explanations. And by the way, it always seems to be the people who have 1,000 things to explain who want to explain everything, right? So the person who has the character and fitness, the minor in consumption of alcohol, the dorm noise infractions, the bad LSAT taking, the upward trend in the GPA, whatever it is, my dog got sick, my grade sucked, like, it's always that person who wants to take time to explain each and everything. And then what happens is that overwhelms all the positive stuff in the application. Like anything great about the resume or anything interesting about the personal statement. Then you're like, oh God, but this, but that. Like choose what needs to be there to make the application stronger and let the rest go.
Yeah. So after a certain point, nobody wants to hear it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and if you know you're someone who has things you have to report, right? Like you have to report the character and fitness things, then be very judicious about what else you choose to report.
Yeah. You also don't want to draw attention to these things too much.
Right. I mean,
good things too.
Some people will say to me, Anne, I have a withdrawal from my freshman year. I had to take classes pass, no pass, and then I was absent, so I got a no pass. Like, if you have one of those, like, let it go. If you have a history of withdrawals that looks funny, like there was something else going on in your life, you might want to explain that. And to be honest, it also depends on the level of school to which you're applying, right? I mean, how much those things matter changes based on the law school itself.
So that'll be a little bit luck of the draw is what you're saying, and maybe you want to apply more places.
Well, I think what I mean by that more is that a law school that's unranked, for example, and I never use that term unranked, but you know, everyone knows what I mean. Okay, so law school that you're not applying to because it's ranked, but like it's your neighborhood law school, okay, or regional law school. I don't worry so much about a withdrawal or two or a no pass. If you're applying to Yale, Stanford, Harvard, Columbia, and you've got a couple of no passes, they probably should be explained.
That makes sense. There's just a different level that they're looking for.
A different level, yeah, and it's a higher threshold, and they don't have a lot of reason to admit someone. There are more reasons not admit someone. So, I mean, that's a pessimistic way of looking at it, but when we're just talking numbers, it's kind of true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. There are some realities there. But what about, aside from withdrawal in classes, a low GPA in general? Is that the sort of thing where if you have a good reason, a good excuse, a good explanation, you do want to explain?
Absolutely. If there's something people aren't going to know, they should know. So for example, if you had a lot of family responsibilities during college, or that's something that the law schools wouldn't otherwise know, you need to share that. Sometimes it comes up in a diversity statement. Sometimes it comes up in a personal statement. If it doesn't, an addendum is a perfectly appropriate time to share that. If you had to work full time to support yourself in college, that can also be expressed on a resume too. But if there are factors that really influence GPA, yes, they should be explained to the law school. If it's your typical, I had a tough time adjusting to college, I might just take it easy and just point out the upward trend and be done with it. It just depends on the person and what the story is, you know?
Yeah, every situation's unique.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're in mid-January right now. Some people are taking the January 26 LSAT. What would be your biggest advice to students in the cycle at this point?
So for those people who are taking the LSAT in January, who have not yet submitted applications, so let me take a step back. If you've submitted applications, let the law schools know that you plan to take the January LSAT, because I assume you want them to see that score in order to be competitive. So let them know that you'll be taking it in case it didn't automatically trigger for them to hold your application. Some law schools will see that you're registered for it and send you an email and ask, do you want us to hold your application? So you'll have to make a decision based on whether you're currently competitive there or not, if you have a previous LSAT score. For people who have not yet applied, I would say some schools you're going to have to apply to blind without seeing that score, just because the way deadlines might fall. But for schools that their deadlines are after February 15th, then wait and see the score and then decide, will you be more competitive now at the schools that you'd like to attend, or will you be more competitive applying earlier in the next cycle? If your numbers are strong, if you get that LSAT score back and it's strong for schools you'd be happy to attend, you don't care about scholarships, and go ahead and apply now. But for most people, I'd say keep in the back of your mind that you might be better off in the long run waiting. I talk to so many people who are just so anxious to get started in law school. And I have to say, a lot of times I feel that's parent driven. Their parents don't want them sitting home for a year. But that's often not in the applicant's best interest in terms of where they end up going to law school, how much they end up paying for law school. And I always find it funny because sometimes parents are driving that decision, but they're not paying for law school. So I think it's a time and of course I'm gearing this comment to some of the younger, more traditional applicants, but this is really right now what we're talking about is an exercise in making a mature decision for your future by yourself. Independent of what other people might expect of you or want from you. And I think the January LSAT takers, that particularly hits hard because many of them feel in a hurry because of pressure from their families. Not all, but some. A lot of people are talking too about whether they can take the March LSAT. It's end of March. It's like March 26th or something. And I think that's an interesting proposition for people who've already been waitlisted. I think that schools who have you on a wait list, they'll look at that March LSAT. So it's kind of interesting. That one's different. That one's not going to hold up your application so much because all schools will go ahead and they might not even see that you're registered for it yet. So I kind of like that idea better in the case for people who are just trying to improve their chances on wait lists.
Yeah, give you a little boost.
Yeah, I went off on a tangent there, but
no, not at all.
It's in my head. Okay.
No, it's all useful. One thing that really stuck out to me is that applicants might really want to just get it over with, apply, be done. But that 1 year is nothing in the grand scheme of things. When you look at how maybe you have to like kill some time working a job you don't really want to be at for a year.
Who cares?
The return on investment when you get into a better law school or get more scholarship money, it's astronomical. It's like the easiest money.
Absolutely. I absolutely. I mean, you have to look at that. I think you're right. And I tell people all the time, you have to be really careful about making good short-term decisions at the expense of horrible long-term decisions. This is a big deal. Where you go to law school, what you pay for it. Look, I mean, everything counts, not just the ranking of your law school, but like where you're going to be living. Like how many times have I heard from people who've decided to go to some law school nowhere near where they know anybody and whether they're not accustomed to, they're miserable, they're depressed, they're homesick, and therefore their grades aren't good, therefore they can't transfer out. Like I hear it all the time. So why put yourself in that situation? I always tell people, don't choose to attend a law school you wouldn't be happy graduating from.
Yeah, you never know. You could end up staying there. Their inertia is powerful, but it's like you're marrying this institution in a way, right?
And that's the friends even if you're happy there, like it's the friends you're going to make. It might be your future spouse that you end up like following them to wherever they live. So like law school is a really impactful time in people's lives. It's a lot happens personally, not just that you're completing your professional degree. So you really do want to put some thought into this and not just go to whatever law school will take you with the January or March LSAT.
Yeah, don't take it lightly. Don't rush it.
Yeah.
I really like the tip, especially contact the law schools and let them know that you are planning on this.
Absolutely. And sometimes they're going to make you make a tough decision. Like, do you want us to go ahead and review your application or wait for your new score? So you're going to have to look and see how competitive am I with the score I have, and make a decision about whether you want to be an earlier applicant with a little bit lower score, or if you're not going to be considered with your current score there, then absolutely have them wait.
Yeah. Important stuff. Well, We could go on and on, but I really appreciate your sharing these tips today. With all the changes recently at LSAC and with the admissions process, I know everyone's going to find it valuable. What's the best way for everyone watching and listening to reach you?
Sure. So lawschoolexpert.com. Lawschoolexpert.com is the easiest. I have a contact form on there and a lot of information. My blog is also accessed there. I try to respond to messages on Facebook. I'm not super fast at it, but I do my best. And I almost never use Twitter, but you can find me there at Ann Levine.
Okay, great.
And
Thanks, Ann.
on Facebook, I think it's Law School Admission Expert on Facebook.
Okay, great. I'll link to those in the description below this video. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Schwartz. I'm at the LSAT blog, also very active on YouTube. So find me there. Anyway, everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks, Ann, for having this conversation today. Looking forward to more in the future.
Sounds great. Thanks, Steve.